Hi there, I'm Sean Osterlink, and this is Overcoming with ACT. Today I wanted to talk to you about something related to couples therapy. I work with couples, that's a big part of what I do. I work with both individuals and couples. I enjoy working with couples to work through relationship issues, and while I'm working with couples, oftentimes I'll use resources in regards to John Gottman's work. He's a researcher who has done a lot of work in the field of marriage and healthy relationships and things like that. There's a lot of books out there by him, and he's got marriage clinics where they do research, and so he's a big name in couples work. And I often suggest for those who want additional reading material to coincide with therapy, I often suggest this book, The 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work. And so in my work with couples, I gear things around bringing those principles into the work, sometimes overtly talking about it or using handouts that relate to these subjects and homework assignments to practice things that build up these different areas, or maybe sometimes more subtly in the background as far as what I'm keeping in mind to direct the treatment. But I thought I could talk about and briefly these different 7 principles, and maybe some other time I'll go into them in more depth. But hey, the first principle here of these 7 principles is building love maps. And what Gottman means by love maps is your sense of how well do you and your partner know each other. When you're dating, you stay very tuned in. You want to know. You're talking about each other's lives typically. You're curious and finding out more early on in the relationship. But as the relationship goes on for a longer period of time, or maybe things get more serious, you get married, then it's easy to start to sit back, get less curious, take things for granted in the relationship, and distance can grow in that way. You can stop being curious and stop knowing as much of what's going on in your partner's life. And so, a way to rebuild connection and work on like healing damage that may be done or distance that's growing is to get back in touch with that, to get curious again. Treat it like you were dating again, to find out more about this person that you're in this relationship with, and rediscover really one another. And so there's exercises in the book that are geared towards that. And maybe I'll talk through exercises like that another time. The second principle of these 7 principles is sharing fondness and admiration for one another. And so with that, it's this sense of how positively or negatively do you view your partner. It's important to have a positive sense of your partner, to look fondly on them, to desire them, to have a sense of trust for them and respect for them, and that adds to the emotional bank account to have those things. That the more positively you can look upon one another and appreciate one another, the more that you've got some space when something negative does happen in the relationship, when there is a letdown, where there is a problem. Then because you overall generally have this positive sentiment, and the book he calls it this positive sentiment override, then it overrides the sense of negativity that can build up in a relationship where not enough of these things are happening. And so the sense is that if more of these things aren't happening that are needed, then more negativity builds in the relationship, more distance grows in the relationship, distrust can grow in the relationship, which can lead to more contempt, just a negative lens for one another. And so these strategies are about turning that around and rebuilding what needs to be there for a healthy relationship to flourish. So number 3 is turning towards instead of away from one another. And what that means is, in a nutshell, is to be intentional to connect with your partner, to make space for that quality time, to go and talk to them, ask them about their day, find out more from them. Right, that hits on these things here, that you're seeking your partner out rather than, let's say, um, doing your own thing after work or zoning out or just being on your phone or vegging out on TV, rather engaging with your partner intentionally. That also relates to conflicts, where people can, you get in a pattern of not being able to figure out your conflicts. You're getting in fights, you're getting in arguments. It seems to be happening more. It seems like you don't know how to fix it. You can't have just work through a conversation without getting gridlocked with one another or getting highly upset. Then it can result in just pulling away from one another, withdrawing from one another, no longer talking to each other or ignoring an issue. And so in that sense, there's this turning away from one another. And so with this principle, it's how can you lean back in? How can you move back towards each other? That links over to an ACT concept of acceptance, of opening up, of leaning into the things that are hard. And so there's emotional difficulty, barriers, with turning back towards your partner when there's a lot of emotional, just a lot of emotional barriers there, a lot of emotional baggage. But so that's that principle. Principle 4 is let your partner influence you. And so what that means is being receptive to the opinions, the attitudes of your partner, not being closed off, not being just you're always right and they're always wrong, not just throwing out their opinions or views on things. Like, this is a relationship, it's a friendship. You ought to care what this person who's special to you, what they think about things, and vice versa. And so that requires an openness, a softening up to being receptive of hearing your partner out on things, rather than being closed off to it. So being willing to give and take there. Number 5 is solve your solvable problems. And that chapter, that topic, that principle is about really conflict management skills. I'm kind of surprised that they don't make this the first principle, because often when couples come in, they often describe their problems in terms of communication problems and want skills to work on communicating better. And this is often a place that I'll typically go into early on with people, so that we can have some things to further these conversations in session. But for whatever reason, they've determined to put there at number 5, and they have more experience and knowledge than me and whatnot, so there's probably a reason for that. But things like that have to do with oftentimes a barrier to good communication as things get started up in a harsh way. Gottman calls them harsh startups. Probably make an episode for that. But basically bad timing, harsh tone of voice or body language, coming at a topic aggressively, coming at it in a blaming kind of way. There's a lot of different ways that you can bring up a conversation in a harsh way or go in that direction. And so learning, this says soft startups, learning ways to soften how you bring something up, to soften your responses to the other person, such as through using more empathy, reflective listening, I statements, gentler tones of voice, things of that nature. So also when talking about these kind of skills, how to use an effective timeout, how to ask for a break, and what to do in order to calm down, and so manage flooding using self-soothing skills, relaxation skills, things like that we'll talk about. Number 6 is overcoming gridlock. And so while there's problems up here in a relationship that are more kind of solvable, that need to be figured out, and the book goes into certain common themes as far as problems couples have. If you want to know more about that, you can read it and see if maybe he's got examples in there that fit your life. But there are problems that are relatively solvable, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to have that conversation effectively to get there. And then there's problems that are not solvable, that become gridlocked issues where maybe there's just not a good way to solve it. Maybe it's an intractable difference that there's really never going to be a good solution to it. Hardline differences that you're never going to see eye to eye on. And so how do you address that with care while also not letting it determine your whole relationship? And so the way that they approach that is through looking at what is the underlying dream, what is the underlying desire, that picture of the future and that future together, what is the need there that underlies whatever that gridlocked issue is. What is it that your partner is imagining? What are they desiring there that needs to be understood, and how can you then respect that, even if it's something that can't be accomplished, to hear and understand and validate those underlying dreams, desires that they have, or that each of you have. So that's a way to get past just being gridlocked and banging heads on that. And then the last principle is creating shared meaning. I put rituals of connection here, and what that means is really what it looks like in your day-to-day life, how you're connecting, how are you finding time for one another. What does it look like when you wake up in the morning? What does it look like when you go to bed at night? What does it look like when somebody is leaving for work and coming home? How do you handle special occasions and holidays? How do you handle making time for dates, date night, making time if you've got kids, when the kids are home or once the kids are in bed? How do you make time for one another? Routines around breakfast, lunch, dinner, different things like that. How do you create more of those rituals? Because there's a lot of time during the week. I think in the book they determine that there's, I don't remember it exactly, there's a certain amount of time that basically, like, maybe anybody could make in their relationship that they could use better if they only were intentional to go, okay, I'm going to find this time to connect with my partner, even just in these little ways. That it's in the little day-to-day kinds of things that really make up the meat of the relationship. It's not vacations, it's not just weekends, it's not those date nights. These things have different roles in the relationship, but really it's in that day-to-day. How are you treating one another? How are you talking to one another? How are you showing love and respect and kindness? How are you showing appreciation for one another? How are you making time? How are you reaching out and showing and expressing that you care for this person and that you care about their needs and you want to know what's going on with them? And you're making that time, even if it's not a lot of time. You're showing that caring and you're experiencing that reciprocally from them. And so that's kind of maybe all of these principles in a nutshell. And so sometimes while I'm working with couples, we're talking more overtly about these principles and maybe about the book and about homework, or maybe it's just happening more subtly in this session, as I often allow couples the space to go, like, where do we need to go today? What do we need to work on? And let you, if you're a client, let you decide the pacing and the topics where we're going to go. So, and if I have my things in the back of my mind, or maybe in the forefront of my mind, as far as where maybe I see you having needs, or where I think it would be good for treatment to go, and at the same time I like to really manage things at the pace of the client and really go collaboratively with where you're at and what you're needing. And so I try not to be too directive with this stuff as far as where therapy needs to go, while not being too laid back or hands off either. I like to be in the middle ground there. So there's a little bit about those 7 principles, and some of how I do couples sessions. So thank you for your time today, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.